Every collector's path is different. Some of us hunt for the pristine, while others find beauty in the well-loved corners of a century-old card. Some of us collect what we know. Others dig deep into the research and the great hobby mysteries. But no matter the path, every journey starts in the same place, a love of the game. Welcome to the Love of the Game Auctions podcast. I'm your host, Crisafulli. On this show, we're going beyond the auction block to talk about the legends, the rarities, and the long-forgotten stories that make this hobby great. I'll be joined by guests who live and breathe sports, experts who help us see the hobby through a different lens. So if you value the lore as much as the score, you're in the right place. Let's go. Welcome back to Love of the Game Auctions podcast. I'm Crisafulli, and today we're diving into the story of a great piece of memorabilia that wasn't created by a company. It's a story that touches on the rarity and importance of being a baseball fan, and one that really captures what makes the hobby so interesting. Later, we'll be joined by Tanith Harley, a collector and historian whose work focuses on uncovering the history of women in baseball through memorabilia and artifacts. But first, let's explore the story behind today's item. Most of the memorabilia we collect is manufactured by a company. Baseball cards manufactured by Topps or Bowman or distributed by Cracker Jack. Vintage game programs manufactured by Harry Stevens and Company. But in 1922 and 1923, a young collector named John White set about making the memorabilia himself. John was a big baseball fan. He grew up in Cleveland, so he hung around League Park with his autograph book. And over the course of 2 years, he patiently assembled a collection of autographs. Babe Ruth, Ty Cobb, Walter Johnson, Ed Walsh, Hack Wilson, Tris Speaker. But not just the Hall of Famers, but other players, long forgotten players, the guys on our baseball cards, and guys who weren't on our baseball cards, who never made it to a baseball card. People who were trainers and groundskeepers. He got them all. 243 signatures in total. He kept that book his entire life, stored away carefully in a padded envelope with a typewritten list of all of the player names inside. In 1977, he was a farmer and he wrote an article for the industry publication Grain Producers News. It was a human interest story in a magazine that focused on his industry, but then it became a part of the story. In that magazine, he took pictures and he posted the pictures of his autograph book on the pages of that magazine. Our spring 2026 auction has this piece, the list, the envelope, and the magazine. A piece of memorabilia that wasn't created by a company. It was created by a fan. Now, we live in a cynical time when autograph books like this get hacked up and pages get slabbed and sold at auction. Who knows who's going to buy this? By the time this episode airs, that will be long sold. But it's our desperate hope that the person who wins this thing has an appreciation for the history of it and has an appreciation for the importance of artifacts like this and keeps it together. That is the story behind the sale. My guest today is Tanith Harley, an Australian baseball historian, writer, and collector whose work focuses on uncovering and preserving the history of women in baseball through memorabilia and artifacts. Tanith's passion for the game began in Canberra, Australia, where she grew up playing baseball, often as the only girl on her team. She began collecting baseball cards in the early 1990s, laying the foundation for what would become a deep interest in the stories behind the sport. Today, her collecting is centered on women's baseball, spanning early Bloomer Girls teams, the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, and beyond. Through both her research and her collection, Tanith brings visibility to stories that might otherwise be forgotten. Tanith, welcome to the program.
Hi, Al. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you, and I appreciate you coming on.
My
so
pleasure.
where are you right now?
Currently, I am in Newcastle, New South Wales, which is about 2 hours north of Sydney.
Okay. Wow. Well, You're definitely the longest distance guest that we will have on this program, half a world away. So I'm so curious about your entry not only into the hobby but into baseball in general. Um, you know, you grew up playing baseball, often as the only girl on your team. How did that shape your connection to the game?
Yeah, of course. It was, sport is so prominent in Australia. We all play it as kids, well, most of
Sure,
us. And by playing T-ball at school, I then became obsessed with the game and then was able to join some teams in Canberra. And certainly, I think when you play baseball or you love baseball, you really love it. Like it's in your blood. You just can't get enough of baseball.
sure,
And that's kind of what happened to me when I started playing. Even being the only girl, I remember them saying, "Oh, there's softball teams you can move across," and I just didn't want to. I wanted to stick with the baseball and that be my sport, that be my thing. Whereas everyone else was playing cricket or football or something like that.
sure.
Yeah, I was just drawn to it.
How popular is baseball in Australia?
Look, it's definitely growing, and it's certainly, I think it goes in waves. The
Hmm.
90s there was a really big influx. I think there was a lot of American influence with the Yankees being really famous, and then the films like League of Their Own and um, what's the other one with anyway, the
Oh,
Cleveland
Field of
Indians one.
Dreams. Yeah, yeah,
Oh, and Field of Dreams,
yeah.
all of
Sure.
those.
Yeah,
So I think there was a really strong influence then, and it became quite popular. It's not up to the numbers that we get for cricket or AFL or rugby or any of those. It
sure.
is popular, but it could definitely keep growing.
Is it ABL baseball or is it Major League American baseball that they follow in Australia, or both?
A bit of both. So we do have quite a following for the ABL here, and certainly baseball in some areas, in Melbourne, in Perth, Sydney, New South Wales, Victoria. They have really strong baseball communities and baseball
Hmm.
leagues. So it definitely has a following, and there is substance there. And people do follow the MLB, probably not as much as the basketball.
Right.
So yeah, it is popular, but it's definitely not the most popular American
It,
sport that we
it
watch here.
it's interesting because I don't think I think all Americans don't really consider the possibility that outside, we're all aware of how popular baseball is in Latin America, but I think outside of those areas, we tend to think of like, oh, we're America, we're baseball, and it never crossed my mind that there was professional baseball in Australia. When I was younger, the Yankees had a young pitcher named Mark Hutton who came from Australia, and I remember thinking, how did he learn baseball? Where, how did he, what was he out like throwing rocks at dingoes or something? And and some scout said, oh, hey, come play for the Yankees, or whatever. So it's really interesting to me to see, um, even the folks I know who live in Australia, they don't follow baseball. So you're really the only person that I know who is a baseball fan, who lives in Australia. So it's only now that I'm realizing that there is an ABL and that there's, so how many teams? How many teams are there?
Well, the ABL, it's sort of changed over the last 12 months, but
Okay,
prior to that, we did have, Melbourne, Sydney, Perth, Adelaide, Brisbane. I think we had a New Zealand team over at one point. So, all the major sort of states put in a
sure.
team. And it was reasonably popular. I actually think that
Yeah.
at a community grassroots level, sort of the state baseball is probably more supported.
Okay.
We do have really great grassroots systems here. We have teams in regional areas, the country. So yeah, I think it is definitely growing, and the support at the lower levels to then get them to the higher levels is definitely there.
Wow, that's pretty tremendous, and it sounds like it's much more pervasive than I would have thought, and that's pretty great. So it's
Yeah,
not unusual
absolutely.
that you're a baseball fan.
I mean, it kind of is. When I tell people, they go, oh, okay, that's interesting. And when I say that I research women's baseball and collect it, most people go, oh, yeah, okay, that's different. So
Wow.
I'm definitely there's a few of us in Australia that are super passionate about the history. But in terms of
Right.
collection, I think, yeah, maybe one of very few here.
Gotcha. So you started collecting in the early 90s. What were you collecting when you started?
Oh, just the good Upper Deck 1990s baseball cards that I would go and
Okay.
get every week with my pocket money.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, definitely that was the start. I still have the binder full of cards. So yeah,
So
that's
the
kind of
same junk wax that we have over here is kind of what
absolutely.
got you started. Okay.
Absolutely.
Um,
I think there was only one or two shops where I lived that sold baseball cards. So, every week
huh.
I'd head there.
How did you find them? Like what was it about them that attracted you?
Oh, look, I mean, I come from a family of collectors, so I think
Okay.
it was having something that connected me to what I loved overseas. So because I
Sure.
couldn't watch a game live, like the games would be on at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, I used to have to set the VCR recorder so I could
Uh-huh.
watch the games. So having something that connected me that I could have in my hand
Sure.
to the thing that I loved was what really drew me to buying them every week.
So how does that evolve into an appreciation for more historical pieces than just the cards of players that you know or want to know? How does it evolve past that for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I remember very early on having a modern day Babe Ruth card and putting that in my baseball bag. And I used to carry that around pretending that it was an old Babe Ruth card and that,
Uh-huh.
I had that connection. So definitely once I'd started playing for a few years and then the League of Their Own came in and then I learned the history of that and then sort of became more obsessed. And as I got older, with a passion for history and a passion for antiques and connecting items, I think that's how it evolved from knowing that I could have a piece that connected me to the thing I loved and
Right.
then finding the story and then finding more, so buying more and trying to put everything together that way. I mean, I guess it's a natural progression when you're a collector or when you become a collector. It always starts with one piece,
Yeah.
and that was it for
What
me, was those
what
cards.
was there a piece that did it, or was it just the cards in general? Were there
I think it was
besides the Babe Ruth? Was there like a
the
thing
fake
that
Babe
that
Ruth card.
made you? Yeah.
Um, yeah, no, I think later on, one of the very first pieces I bought was a 1920s catcher's mitt. And that at a younger age really was like, oh my
Sure.
gosh, I have this thing. I have this thing that somebody in the 20s wore, and maybe it was worn by Bill Dickey, or who knows, like
Yeah.
maybe it was
Yeah.
worn by someone really famous in the league, or a woman in the bloomer. Like, so
Mhm.
I think that excitement from just having one tangible piece in my hand was like,
Mhm.
okay, that's it. Now I want to like find everything else.
I totally get it. I went through a period where I would buy vintage baseball gloves from the 20s or the 30s just on eBay, just random gloves, and then restore them and just play with them. When I was coaching my kids, and I would bring the 10 gloves to baseball practice and put one on each kid's hand and say, somebody in the 1920s wore this glove, try and catch, and and throw them the ball, and that kind of thing. There's just something about that connection. It's very
Yeah.
tactile, and it you're playing this game that and yet you're doing it with a piece of equipment that's been doing this for 100 years, and
Right. Yeah.
that's always amazing to me. So it's funny, and this is, I guess, how we met. Love of the Game was fortunate enough to handle a great collection of memorabilia and cards related to women in baseball. Before we handled that, I knew very little, and I still know nothing. But I knew very little. I was very friendly with the collector, and still am, who made that consignment. And she was one of the first women that I had ever met in the hobby, who was a hobbyist, who's a collector. Um, what is it now that I know a little bit more than nothing, I guess? I'm curious as to what it is that drew you to collecting women in baseball specifically.
Yeah, good question. But I think, like for many of us, when A League of Their Own came out, whether or
Mm-hmm.
not you already played baseball or you didn't, or you wanted to play sport, seeing women be so strong and powerful and independent and capable of playing sports, certainly in the 1940s, let alone
Sure.
nowadays, it really resonated with me, and it really stuck with me that I was so intrigued to learn more about their history. And
Mm-hmm.
by finding, and so many people have researched and done, obviously the film and prior to that, but finding those connections and those pieces so that I could
Sure.
understand them more is definitely how it got me connected. And that
Right.
was kind of the draw card of wanting to know more. So it all started with so many people, as it does with A League of Their Own. And then from there, it just snowballed into wanting to know, because then they would have played softball in the 1930s perhaps, but then maybe they played hardball somewhere else, and they played in the NGBL. So then, like, it was finding all the connections that way.
Right. What causes you to go back earlier than the All American Girls Professional Baseball League? You go back beyond that. What was it about that, and what draws you to it now?
Yeah, so for a really long time, I focused on sort of the 40s and 30s and around there.
Mm-hmm.
There were two components that really got me looking earlier. One was when I first started researching the history of women in baseball in Australia,
Mm-hmm.
which had been sort of lightly touched on, but not really. I couldn't find any information. I couldn't find it in a book. I
Okay.
couldn't find it in a museum. And once I started to research, I discovered that women's baseball in Australia was very strong in the 1920s.
Okay.
We had industrial leagues, we had community leagues. We made a first Australian women's baseball team in 1932. I should know that off by heart. So that drew me to learning that was long before All American Girls. And they played baseball rules. They played overhand pitching. Yes, there were, the dimensions were slightly smaller, but it wasn't a softball game, which is,
Right.
how the All American Girls started, was softball. And yes, they did progress, but to learn that we were playing baseball here was
Mm-hmm.
such an eye opener. And that kind of made me like deep dive into women's baseball prior to the 40s. So that was one very strong component of it. The other component was Barbara Gregorich, her book, Women at Play.
Mm-hmm.
So if people haven't read it, I highly recommend it. Barbara did all her research in the 90s. She drove out to different, towns and people and museums and did it all by hand, essentially. So she wrote a fabulous book. And from that book, she researched a, a woman called Leona Kearns, her sister Nellie. And from that, she had Nellie's balls that were from 1932, 33, 34,
Mm-hmm.
from the Bloomer League. And once I
Okay.
saw them and had them, I was like, oh, okay, this is it. I
Huh.
need to know more about the Bloomer Girls. I need to know more about these women that played, their connection to the All American, their connection to prior that. And that was just, yeah, that's kind of been my deep dive ever since.
It when I was handling that collection and trying to learn. One of the things that um, struck me but didn't really surprise me was that in the early days of baseball was a game that everyone played, and men played it, women played it, they played together, they played separately, kids played it, and it was a pastime that was shared by people and spread all across the country in the 19th century and early 20th century, and then somewhere along the line men, because this is what we do, sort of made it this thing where men started to say, well, you have to be strong and you have to be big to be able to play this game. This is a hard game. It takes a lot of skill. Women can't play this. And so, but before that, it was a game for everyone. And there actually was a healthy, number of women who were playing baseball in the late 19th century, early 20th century. We ruined it. Sorry.
I mean, it's true. I'm not going to argue with you on that one.
Yeah. So for somebody like me who knows nothing about women's baseball globally or in the United States, but wants to learn, where do you recommend that they start?
There are a few books that I would definitely recommend. Women at Play. She does touch across, sort of from the beginnings onwards, and the real characters and figures that have become very important in telling that narrative and telling that story.
Sure.
Certainly, there is, if you're ever in Cooperstown, they do have a Diamond Dreams exhibition, which is focused on women in baseball, strongly focused on the All-American, but it does touch on, other generations and other genres.
Sure.
So certainly, yeah, those would be the first two. Definitely, there's, look up. There's another Bloomer Girl book written, I can't recall the author's name, but that is really in depth about the women that played very early on and what they were up against.
Right.
So yeah, definitely, the internet researchers of look up Bloomer Girls, look up, Margaret Nabel, look up Maud Nelson, those sorts of names. They're the sort of the pioneers.
Right.
Certainly early 20th century.
Sure. That was Maud Nelson was one that I remember reading about and thinking, wow, just there's, and I think I had a couple of cabinet photos, maybe even in that auction. So for somebody who's new to this area of the hobby and wants to dabble or start thinking about maybe starting a collection, where do you recommend that they start? And is there any resource for information?
There's not a great resource, apart from, I'm sure there's a few people out there that have the side passion obsession that I do, where I actually save all the items that I see go up for sale, just so I have a catalogue of what has been produced over the last 100 years or 100 plus years of items.
Right.
I think if they're like me and they want to find a story and a connection behind things, just find a photo on eBay, find a vintage photo of women in baseball, and then look at their uniforms and try and find the name of their uniforms. Or if there's any information written on it about what town, go and look up a newspaper article and then find who that team is, because then you will find who played. And often you'll see that they then played for multiple teams. And possibly they played for the Philadelphia Bobbies, or possibly they played for, the All-Star Ranger Girls. And you'll see how certainly in the 20s and 30s, it's all connected. Everyone's sort of, the Hollywood stars, they played here and they went here. And I think that's a really lovely way to find the story and the history behind them, is just by finding one piece and seeing how it connects to the history and to everything else.
That's pretty great. It's fascinating to me, because it's a way to relearn baseball. It's like learning a brand new sport. This is kind of what I was going through when we handled that collection, was that there's this whole other hobby that's, it's got the same appeal. It's got the same importance, and it's got the same historical significance, and all of these great stories that are just waiting to be uncovered. And what's cool about it is that so much of it hasn't been uncovered, so you really are just unearthing, story after story after story, and there's really no limit to where you can go,
Absolutely.
How hard is it to authenticate and then also contextualize the items from history like that were, maybe a barnstorming team that just had a piece of promotional material that they handed out to people at the park or something like this? How hard is it, and how do you authenticate that kind of stuff.
Yeah, look, to be fair, I think it's relatively easy at the moment because
Hmm.
it isn't something that people are trying to reproduce or trying to
Right.
fake or trying to sell off and make money on. Yes, that I do see that starting to happen with All American Girls items and some
Right.
photos, and think maybe I've seen one ball, but realistically, when I see something, I can tell at the moment just because I've seen
You've
so many
handled enough.
pieces and I follow so many pieces.
Sure.
Um, it is there, yeah, there is discrepancy, certainly with some of the cabinet cards. I think, we've maybe chatted on before, like you can sometimes the paper, but it's not necessarily something that I think has been produced to be fake.
I do find, or I have found that the difficulty for me has been dating this stuff, and not so
Mm.
much authenticating it, but trying to understand, you know, is this 1910 or is it 1930? In collecting language, that's eons of difference, right? And so, um, sometimes I find that difficult, or a cabinet photo that I think, this was done in the 1890s because that's what makes sense, and then I find out later, that was 1915, which again is eons of difference. So I think the research is a little more difficult because it's not everywhere the way, Major League Baseball, there's tons of newspaper accounts and all of that kind of stuff. So that's a challenge that I've run into on the few pieces that come across my desk.
Yeah, I think definitely timeline, certainly pre 1915, is really difficult.
Yeah.
Just because, like you say, there isn't enough knowledge and enough history produced on those items. Um, I am sort of slowly learning about the variations in the uniforms for the women.
Hmm.
And that can help in terms of years, but we're talking like maybe a 5-year category there,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
necessarily pinpointing to a year. But I agree with you. Certainly, pre 1915 is incredibly hard to date.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping, the more information that I store and catalog, and hopefully one day I can share it, with everybody else, whoever's interested in it, we'll be able to, put things towards the right year. So, yeah.
Sure. Do you think, in general, the hobby is starting to better recognize the importance of the women's baseball material? Do you see more interest in it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. In the last 10 years, especially, it's changed enormously. Even I know prices in the hobby have gone up a lot and it
Sure.
does fluctuate. But seeing, things that used to be like, click $30, I'll take that. Thank you very much, is now 300, 500, thousands now. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it has definitely grown. I do, I do think that it's become a bit of a niche now. So it's like, well, we'll get, because we've seen the importance of the Negro League, we've seen the
Right.
importance of Jackie Robinson, we've seen the importance of sort of barnstorming these areas that aren't just the Major League Baseball. So I think that the women's baseball is sort of becoming one of those niches, and that people are like, oh, yep, I'm just going to have that piece so that I've got one piece that I can say, oh, this is an All American Girls ball, or this is a Maud Nelson cabinet piece. That's not to say that people don't just collect it all over like they do baseball, but I have seen certainly in the last 10 years, if not 15 years, that it's changed. Yeah, it just keeps growing and growing.
Yeah. Yeah. I was surprised when we handled the collection that we had, um, how much interest there was from so many different places. And, I didn't know how that was going to shake out. I was thrilled to take the collection and to offer it, both because the collector is my friend, and also because it was such an interesting thing to present. But I didn't know how it was going to be received by our customer base. And I was really surprised at how many different winners there were. And how many people who were pre-war collectors in particular, who told me afterwards that they do collect women in baseball, and it's just, not as, like you said, it's there's not a T206 Wagner in that category, right? So there's not like a monster piece that's super valuable that everybody knows about. As a collector, what piece in your collection do you think means the most to you personally?
Ooh, that's like trying to pick your favorite child, isn't it?
Yeah, I know.
I have a few. I
Uh-huh.
definitely have a few. I think certainly having uh, I have a Margaret Nabel signed ball from the New York Bloomer Girls, which I think is very important because it's the only one I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Um, the balls that I have from Nellie Kearns, which were from the All Star Ranger Girls,
Hmm.
which were the last years that the Bloomer Girls were ever in existence. Again, the only ones I've ever seen. So they're really significant and important.
Right.
I love from just my childhood that I have quite a lot of balls throughout the seasons of the All American Girls, but having a 1943, which is the very first year, and
Right.
54, which is the last year. I think those years are right. God. Having those two, God, that's a massive faux pas if I've got that wrong. Having those two as well are really significant.
Hmm.
Some uniforms that I've got, but the most important thing that I currently am the caretaker of or looking after
Excuse me.
no, you're fine. All of Leona Kearns' personal items. So I have recently been researching her and Nellie, her sister, and have become very close with her wonderful family. And I am now looking after for the foreseeable future so that we can hopefully present Leona's baseball uniform that she wore for the Bobbies in Japan, all her items that came back off the ship. If you don't know the story of Leona, please look it up. It's very
Wow.
important, significant, heartfelt, tragic. So they are currently, they're invaluable to me. They're worth so much, and they're so important to the family and to the history of women's baseball. So definitely having those items, yeah, they're the
Wow.
number one.
That sounds phenomenal. It sounds like you have a monster collection. It sounds great. I want to
Is
see
this getting
pictures.
there? Yes, absolutely. I'll send you some.
What is one misconception that you think people have about women's baseball history?
So I think it's that they weren't very good and that
Hmm.
they didn't play hardball. And both of those have been proven incorrect.
Sure.
There were many reports back in the day that it was a farce and that the men only came to watch to see them fall over or their bloomers go up, but they played really well. And
Yeah.
certainly as they started to barnstorm and become these professional barnstorming teams, they played against men. And if you read the newspaper reports, they won. They were really good. Not all of them, but a majority of them.
Sure.
And then you look at the teams in Australia that played in the 20s, and they were good. They were good players. They were good teams. So I think historically that they weren't good enough to play or play
Hmm.
professionally. And maybe that's how it became that, because it was reported in the newspapers, that's how it sort of shut them down, and so
Yeah.
women weren't then allowed to play. And also that that they only played softball. I know in the notes from Nellie Kearns, she was just needed to make sure the world knew that they played hardball,
Yeah.
that they got hit with those balls, they played overhand pitching, same rules. They grew up on the farm playing with their next door neighbors who ended up playing in the major leagues. They played on the men's teams. They played baseball. And
Yeah.
I think those two historically still sort of float around.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's something that I encountered, and it's funny. I was just last night. I was doing some research into an amateur team, a men's team, an amateur team in Pennsylvania, and I encountered this article about a women's barnstorming team that was coming in and taking on all comers. Any, if and they played a game against one of these town teams and destroyed them. And it was, and this was, a team that I was researching. I was, kind of following them, and it was like, such and such a women's team came in and they won 12-4 or so. I mean, it was they housed them, and it was like, wow, that they must have been excellent players. It didn't make any comments in the article. It was a very short piece, but it didn't say anything about, oh, there were 4 men on the team or any of that kind of thing that you hear sometimes when you
Mm.
hear about women's baseball. Oh yeah, there were 6 men and 4 women or whatever. There was nothing like that in the article. It was clearly like a women's team came in and beat the pants off of these guys and then moved on to the next town. And it was pretty cool to see that. So are you following the WPBL at all?
I will be, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's great. I'm very excited. I'll be actually over in Rockford in July.
Oh, no
So
way.
yeah, I am going to go and see the World Cup that's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
The team's got announced today, actually,
Yeah.
in Rockford, and I will be hopefully down in Marshall, Illinois, which is where I'll be presenting a talk and small exhibit on Leona, which is close to where she
Oh,
grew up.
no kidding.
Yeah, so I'm very excited for the league. I think
Yeah.
it's a great time. I hope, I think women's sport in general has grown so much.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly in Australia, the influence of the Matildas, which is the Australian soccer team,
Yeah.
has been enormous
Sure.
on young girls coming
Yeah.
through and playing all sorts of sports because they see that they can do it and they can be
Yeah.
professional and they can be promoted. And so I hope that the Women's League has that same effect on all the little girls across the world, because baseball is played, like, in so many different, it's huge in
Sure.
Japan and Korea and, all these countries. I hope that it has that effect.
Yeah.
And yeah,
It,
I think the framework's there. We've got a whole lot of Aussie girls going over, which I'm super excited about.
uh-huh.
So yeah, I'm really excited to see how it goes.
Yeah, it's been really cool to watch, Kelsey Whitmore. I've been sort of following her for a couple of years now, and it's been cool to watch her social media posts and all of that, where this is baseball, and
Mm.
these people can play, and I'm really hoping that the hobby, not as much the collectors as the manufacturers, whoever it is that's going, I mean, somebody's going to make baseball cards, and whoever that is, I'm hoping that it doesn't turn into this, this kind of weird lottery thing, this gambling thing that's happening with contemporary baseball cards. Like, I want a little girl to be able to walk into a store and buy a pack of baseball cards and pull a Monet Davis card out of the pack and just know, like I feel like there's some responsibility, some level of responsibility of the card manufacturers. This is my appeal to the card manufacturers, by the way, some level of responsibility that they need to have to make sure that little girls can become involved in this hobby and in baseball the way little boys have always been. So I'm really excited about it, and I think it's going to be great baseball. I think it's going to be. Major League Baseball has gotten really boring to me. It's just home runs and walks and strikeouts, and it's not really baseball in so many ways. And I think we're going to see actual real baseball in the WPBL, which I think is going to be great, and it's going to be fun, and it's going to be exciting. And I also know that if it can continue to have legs and stay afloat, that what this means is that young women will be able to go to college and get a full ride to college on a baseball scholarship and get an education where they normally. I mean, it has this such far-reaching importance. So I'm so fired up about it. I think it's going to really be great.
That's great. Yeah, and I agree with you 100%. And certainly not for young girls and young women to then have to change codes because
Yeah.
they hit a certain age and it's like, well, sorry, we have nothing to offer you. You have to go
Right.
play softball.
Go play softball.
And, with all respect to softball, which is a fabulous game, it's not baseball.
Right.
If you play baseball you love baseball, you're a baseball player.
Yeah.
It's sort of like saying, well, you play soccer, now go and play rugby. It's so yeah, I agree with you 100%,
Yeah.
and I'm pumped to see it to grow, and I can't wait to see, you know, young kids, boys and girls, but you know, the girls being able to see that it's there, it's real, it's professional. I can get my ball signed, I can wear the jersey,
Yeah.
you know, and see a future for me. Whether or not they achieve it, just to dream is a
Yeah.
really important step.
It's going to be great. And you know, these women who are taking the step and playing this year are such trailblazers. It's going to be so cool that there's going to be this whole crop of athletes that are doing this for the first time. Yeah, I just can't wait. I can't say enough about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so tell me one story or one detail that you've uncovered in your research that you think people should know.
Ooh. It's a hard question.
I feel like you probably got more than one. So
I've got more than one. Oh, there's so many. Look, I think for me, I'm deeply passionate currently about Leona and Nellie's history.
mm-hmm.
But with that comes the history, that sort of the branches that come from just one or two people playing baseball. And that is that with their story, you know, they grew up in a small town in Illinois, very small, called West Union. I think it's got about 200 people. And Leona was playing baseball on the side of the road in Jacksonville, throwing a ball with a friend. A scout from the Philadelphia Bobbies came over, saw her throw, and said, hey, we want to take you to Japan with the Philadelphia Bobbies in 1925. And as a 16-year-old, off she went.
Huh.
She then went and played. Eddie Ainsmith was the manager, the former MLB player. So he was the manager. He took them over. Edith Houghton was on the team. I may know Edith Houghton. She was a very young Bobbies player, became the first female scout for the MLB in 1946 for the Philadelphia Phillies. So I won't go into the whole story because it's quite long, but just the connections. And I think it's so important once you start researching is just to look for the connections, because then you have Nellie, who played for Maud Nelson, and then played with, you know, people that were really important and significant in other areas of baseball and have their own stories. So I think the most important thing I've uncovered is how it's connected and how people, especially women's baseball in turn of the century and going through into the Depression, were just passionate, hardworking. Yeah. They traveled, they caught trains and buses, and they went overseas as a kid just to play the game, but also how they're all connected. And that's definitely what I take away from it. And I think once people just read one story, they'll see that.
So when is your presentation in July?
I haven't got the date booked in, but it will be somewhere between the 27th and the 31st down at Marshall. So Marshall, Illinois is a beautiful town, which is just north of West Union, where they grew up.
The National Sports Collectors Convention is in Rosemont, Illinois. That same time, okay? Everybody who's watching this has enough passion for the game and enough of an appreciation for the history of the game that they should be paying attention to what Tanith is doing, and maybe think about taking a day off of the national and going to see this presentation. It sounds like it's going to be great. Do we know how far this is from Rosemont, Illinois?
So it's south of Champaign. So
yes, I'm asking somebody who's in Australia right
now. Let me think. I normally travel like 2 or 3 hours to get to Champaign, and then like an hour and a half or an hour to get to Marshall. So I don't know, maybe 3 hours if you're driving.
Piece of cake.
I don't drive over there. It's too frightening.
Yes, this is a thing. Let's connect about this offline for sure. This is all right. So everybody needs to pay attention, and I will, surely put this on my social media as soon as you have dates. You can look for the Love of the Game social media, and also Tanith's social media. How can we find you online?
Yeah, so mainly my Instagram is where I post a lot of the baseball stuff. So that's just tanith.j.harley on Instagram.
Awesome. Okay. So we close every episode of the program the same way. Okay. And I know we've touched a lot about the personal connection that you have with the game and with the material that you have, and how you got started in baseball and all of this. But what was the one thing that you can point to, just one thing that caused you to fall in love with this game?
The one thing I think, for the deep love and passion, it has to be a league of their own. And I think so many people, certainly of my generation and my age, who
Uh-huh.
love the film, but like that, seeing them play, and
Yeah.
also just the understanding of women in the 40s playing professional baseball, like that's it. Because
Yeah.
if they could do it back then we can do it now. And I could do it as a 9-year-old kid or 10-year-old kid playing on the boys teams, getting knocked over and balls thrown at because I was the only girl. That's the pinpoint for me.
That's fantastic. That's the best one. That's the best
Yeah.
one. We record 3 of these at a time, and
Right.
and that's the best one of today.
My
Um,
8-year-old is on. We can edit this out, but my 8-year-old's on a team with one girl, and she hit her first home run this weekend.
that's
And
awesome.
it was like, I mean, I almost have to send you the video. You would probably love it. It
That's
was, like,
fantastic.
amazing.
So cool. All right, Tanith, it was great to have you with us, and
Thank you so much.
thanks for being here and for educating us and showing us what a great hobby that you're involved with. It's all kind of the same hobby, but this is whole niche that's there that is only going to get bigger, and
Yeah, I think so.
people are going to go back. Especially with the WPBL, people are going to want to go back. They're going to want to learn about the history, and that benefits everybody. So thanks for having
Thank
some time
you.
for us and for being with us, and hopefully we'll
Loved
see you
it.
in Chicago.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Awesome.